Hi, I'm Angus Kress Gillespie, your host for East Brunswick Television. I'm here today with Jean-Paul Picard, who's a Canadian-American who grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. I recently met him when he was hosting an exhibition of his work at the Hoboken Museum. I was so excited with what I saw that I decided to invite him on my show to share his work with my viewers. By way of background, Jean-Paul received his formal education at the Parsons School of Design. He moved to Hoboken in 1981, where he engaged in street photography. Over the years, his photography has emerged into works that are three-dimensional and sculptural in nature. His work has been widely recognized in the world of artistic photography, and it's my pleasure to welcome him to our studio today. Jean-Paul, how did you get started making art in the first place?
My aunt was a painter, and I got my first art box from her, which was a box full of tubes of paint. And so I was painting a little bit as a child in grade school and stuff like that. So that's how I started.
Yeah.
And then high school, I actually took 4 years of art in high school and 2 years at vocational school, Votech in Denville. So Morristown High was the a place. There was an art house next to the school, and so for 4 years that house existed, and I was one of a member of. We were actually about 25 students who actually graduated Morristown High and were going into art school, it's college. So that's how it started.
It was by the side of the school.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And can you describe your creative process?
Well, with a lot of the work that I'm doing now, what I'll do is I will take a lot of photographs, and then I will print the ones I think are going to give me something, and then I'll manipulate the paper to get a feel if, okay, is it worth it to do it as a metal photograph?
And so photography is your favorite medium?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what motivates you to create?
I don't know. That I really don't know is what, but what catches my eye and what happens is that I see something and I go, oh, I will say that's interesting or that's unusual, and I will photograph it and then go through it to see if there's anything that really captures my eye. So it's whatever catches my eye, and I feel, that actually can be a big piece. That can actually work as one of my pieces for that.
Yeah. And how did you find the courage to break out of the rigid rectangle?
Oh, that was a photograph I took where it was the World's Fair in New York, and I printed it, and I said, that photograph would look great, but the horizon is a diagonal. So what I did was I took that diagonal photograph and I decided to print it straight, the horizon straight. And by having it printed straight, that meant that the sides of the photograph were tilted in a white piece of paper. And when I cut a little bit of the top and the bottom, it became a six-sided photograph, and I said, oh, I'm onto something. I'm onto something very, very, very strong. And that's what led me to the series that I've been doing.
I recall you were early on in the 1980s attracted to Hoboken because of Celebration 1982.
Yeah.
There were some 300 events, some 2,000 artists.
Yes.
And we have a photograph showing the interior.
Right. That was, the event was called 50 Artists on the Waterfront, and it was a lot of different artists presenting different work. My work happened to be a documented photography of the arson that was going on in Hoboken at the time. It was a protest march. And so I had documented that protest march, and I had like 6 or 8 photographs matted and framed, very traditional work. And the curator of the show, Ray Guzman, he thought it was so an important series that had hung in the #1 spot of the whole exhibit. And this was the entire Pier C in Hoboken.
Another thing that attracted you to Hoboken was a number of small stores, the mom and pop stores.
Yeah.
And in particular, we have a photograph of Frank's framing store.
Right, Frank.
With the corners of the frames.
Right. Frank Mazzio was a local artist. He had been there for many, many years, and he owned the house that he had his store in. He was this well-known artist. And I did a whole series of owners and stores in Hoboken because they fascinated me that these businesses were still in existence, that they still made a living of some sort, and it was quite good. It was very, very interesting group, and that was my second photography show in Hoboken. The one with the Arson March was the first one. So those were my two first photography shows in Hoboken.
And we all know Hoboken as a city, tends to be friendly to artwork. We have a photograph of someone putting up the artwork on the kiosk, and it appears to be like a police officer doing the paperwork.
Yeah, that's me being arrested. So what happened was we had a city truck van. We were transporting kiosks and display areas so we could put up advertising about Celebration 82, because not only did I have show my work during Celebration 82, I was a volunteer. And while my friends all skedaddled across the street and taking photographs of me, I'm dealing with the police officer. I had a letter from the mayor saying they're all right, they've borrowed a truck, they're delivering stuff around. And so the city did support our work.
And you were able to talk your way out of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was, matter of fact, the police suddenly, the police person the detective who interviewed me contacted headquarters, said, could you tell all the cops, leave them alone?
And I know you're interested in portraiture, and we have a photograph there, two men very close up.
Right.
And so I wanted to ask, how do you make them comfortable to take such a close-up photograph?
Well, I had them sit. I have a very small studio, and so at that time, and I had them just sit, and I would talk to them as I photographed. And the shooting session would last no more than an hour and a half. So that's how, and I did a series of photographs, about 25 people I did. And that was my first museum show in Hoboken. I think it was 2007, if I remember.
And you try to capture their personality.
Right. I try to capture I try to capture their personalities, and they could have different personalities in different poses and stuff like that. So I just tried. I didn't really pose them so much as I just simply talked to them and photographed them. And I told them, I'm going to be moving around. I'm going to get close. I'm going to get far. And let's just go with it and see what happens. You know.
I remember the 1964 World's Fair, and I remember the Unisphere, that stainless steel sculpture that represents the Earth. You took a photograph of it.
That's the one that I was talking about, where it was the horizon was going downhill in the original shot. And then what I did was to print it on a sheet of paper, so then the horizon was straight, though the rest of the photograph was crooked. And that's basically how I with the series that I started, which I called Sweeps, was the idea that the horizon and vertical lines are not the outer edge of the image, but the inner image itself. And I let the white become the negative space of the image. So instead of having it being cut off by the paper in some way, I let it float in the paper.
Changing the subject, we all know in the city we have alleyways, which are narrow pedestrian walkways between two buildings, and you were fascinated enough with this alleyway to take a photograph, but the blue sky is in the background.
And the blue sky is in the water because it's reflecting there as well. This is in the Newman Leather Building, and it's a building that goes all the way back to 1864. And I have a studio there, and many other artists many of them who've received grants from New Jersey have their studios in that building. So it's buildings, actually. It's a multiple set of buildings there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of city life, we're all familiar with city buses. We stand on the sidewalk. We wait for the bus to approach. If it's not our bus, we watch it depart.
Right.
Now, you did an interesting photograph where you sort of captured a bus both coming and going. Tell us about that photograph.
It's about, before I did panoramic views, I was doing multiple images. So an idea of time and from one end of a photo to the other was very interesting to me. So knowing that the painting of the bus was there, done by Ray Guzman, I decided to try to look at a schedule, wait for the bus to appear, and then as soon as the bus was at the red light, I would start panning the photo, and then by the time I was finished, the bus was leaving and heading down to the train station. So it just how happened, the painting was at a bus route, it was right there, and so it worked really, really well in that space, and stuff like that.
One of the charms of Hoboken is the Arts and Music Festival, and you got a nice photograph there of the people kind of celebrating. It appears to be summertime. They're wearing T-shirts and shorts.
Right.
Tell us about that photo.
That photo is one of the first ones I did where I used what was known as a digital ground. I was interested in not always having a white background around a photo. So I tried using a color paper, but if I just printed right on color paper, the color of the ink would get married into the color of the paper and it would dull it. So somehow if I could brighten the color, so I painted a white, what it was called a digital ground. It's kind of like white gesto for painting. And I would just paint it on the paper, and then I would run the paper through the printer. And so some parts of it would be bright and some parts would be melt into the paper. And so it gave it a very interesting look to it. And I found that, and I enjoyed that as a piece.
Changing the subject, Hoboken is known for its two Roman Catholic Italian-based churches, and you got an interesting photograph of a saint procession.
Right.
Tell us about that photograph.
Hoboken every year has festivals where the saint is carried, and that probably is the St. Anne's feast. And so the statue is being pulled, and this one is being pulled on the street, and I wanted to give the sense of the movement, and so I used my camera and I moved the camera as I took the picture, like sweeping across like a brush, so to give it that feeling of both being able to see the man who's helping to move the statue and the statue head on the top and stuff like that. I'm doing all my work using this device, the iPhone.
Amazing that it has enough resolution to work.
Correct. And there are ways I can actually bump up the resolution to make it work as well.
Another interesting thing you did, I mean, we've all had the experience of riding in a bus, looking out the window. These days, the buses often have these advertising wraps on the outside. It allows the passenger to still see out, but the passerby gets to see the ad on the side of the bus.
Right.
But the person inside the bus gets a kind of distorted view of the landscape because of this black hexagonal.
Right. Depends how close the camera is or far, but there's a pattern, a dot pattern, that allows the viewer to view out. But it's really obscuring the view. And so I was very fascinated how if the camera I'm moving the camera, the bus is moving, the people are moving, what is the image that comes out of it? And these have been pretty much straightforward prints, and I've only done them on paper. So.
And we're all familiar with cityscape photography.
Right.
The elements of a city.
Right.
It's common sense. You have a photograph, condominium with a tower, but both the building and the tower look somehow twisted.
They are, because again, this is the panoramic viewing of it. Now, this was the first photograph I actually exhibited that was shaped on, and it was mounted onto gator board. And so I would cut out whatever the camera didn't register as an image, it would register it as black. So I would remove that, and instead of having the paper as a negative space, the wall was a negative space.
Huh. I want to talk about Exchange Place. Exchange Place is in Jersey City, right? Yeah. Well, tell me about your artistic impulse. It's sort of a blurred image. What is it? 25 inches by 25 inches, kind of square.
Right.
Yeah.
That one is a dye bond print, so it's printed on white aluminum. And that piece is similar to where I'm looking out the window through advertisement, and it's the same sort of thing. And I'm moving my camera, and so that's the effect that happens as the light rail train arrives at the platform as the light rail station, which is above the PAT station.
I think nowadays almost all of us have taken trips by airplane. Sometimes we're sitting at the window. We're above the clouds. We're looking down at the clouds instead of up at the clouds. And that's a pretty common photo. How did you do it differently?
What I did was, because the plane's moving, I just simply held the camera, and on the panoramic setting, I just hit on and just held my camera for about 10 minutes. And that's the exposure. Because I'm moving, and in this case, this was a short exposure, and so it became a square-ish. It is shaped. There was areas that it didn't record an image, so I removed that by cutting it out, literally with a jigsaw, because it was printed on dye bond. And after I received it, I cut it. Dye bond is aluminum both sides with a plastic core in between. It's like a foam core.
Huh. I noticed recently you've become fascinated with glass bricks or glass blocks. And these are hollow squares of glass used architecturally, usually in public buildings. And they have a dual purpose, it seems to me. If you're inside, it emits light, but it kind of blurs the image as you're looking out. And certainly makes it difficult to see in. It's a kind of a privacy thing with the building. But you're fascinated with the way it changes the image.
So there what happens is the glass brick from the light rail is used to prevent the wind from coming from the river. That's pretty much, and to prevent a storm like rain doing that. And so I saw this, and I started, again, using the camera. I called the iPhone a camera. I was doing all sorts of movement, being close, being far, taking it. So that's how I shot that particular piece, and all my pieces are that way. And then later on, I decided to do it, to give it more sculptural by bending it or folding it.
Yeah. We have another example coming up with the glass block photographs. There's a sky at the top, then kind of mid-level, then kind of street level. We kind of get the idea, but we don't get the details. Tell us about that photograph.
It's just pretty much the same as the other work that I've done, where I'm just moving the camera along and seeing what will appear. I take a lot more photos. Like a street photographer, he takes a lot more photos before you decide which one you're going to use to print or to publish to tell the story.
What about the next one? It's kind of a bent fence, kind of a one-of-a-kind.
That's where in that case, I tried something different, which was I just photographed within one block. So the other blocks didn't appear in the picture. And that's one thing about my images. Pretty much there's little cropping of the photo whatsoever. And so I noticed this person sitting at the other end, and I saw people moving around a little bit, waiting for the light rail at that part of the station.
They were kind of under cafe umbrellas.
Right,
yeah. So you're giving us a fresh look at something that's usually overlooked.
Correct.
Yeah. And then there's another one. There's glass blocks with two bicycles, and the sky's at the top, and people are in the middle, and the wheels are at the bottom. Tell us about that one.
Well, that one is always like I'm watching, oh, a bike is coming. So I keep an eye out for what's coming, and I will then try to take a picture while the bikes are moving. Sometimes I miss.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get it. So it really depends what's going on, and sometimes they'll change direction on me. They'll just turn away, or they're too far away.
And we have another glass block example. When we see a woman, she has a ball cap, she has a pink top.
Oh, yes. I photographed it because of the color. I looked out for the color. I find that the color clothing works much better than the black coats. Winter is not really a good time to photograph because everybody's tending to wear the New York black coats.
Yeah, it's a symbol of power, masculinity or something. Anyway, we have another photograph. I call it a fractured person. It's a multiple image. It's a 10-inch by 20-inch.
Oh, yes.
Apparently, time-lapse photography.
Well, this is the panoramic, but what's happening is the cameras and the program within the camera is actually taking multiple pictures and stitching it. But how it puts it together, I don't know till I finish up. And I think because of the pattern behind him, which is the glass block, this is in front of the glass block, it seems to have added the repetition. The way it did.
This is different. We're not inside the glass block. The glass block is the background.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Because I was interested in the man in the corner kind of talking on his phone. You don't see a phone. He's just talking, So we're not sure if there was anybody at the other end.
Now, I want to talk about the three images sculpture, New Jersey and me imperfect together.
Yes.
It's an example of what I would call photography sculpture.
Correct. Correct.
Tell us about that.
That piece was very large, and I thought it would be too much to put it as a wall piece. One of the problems in my work is that I'm limited to what I can show because I'm showing in basically competition, and there's usually size limits. So I said, so let me try to make a sculpture. And that's what I did. I needed an extra piece, and I went back to the original shoot and found an extra shot. And I was able to print that and put that together with the other pieces. And I put a hinge so it actually moves in the back a little bit.
Now, I wanted to touch upon self-portraiture. We have two self-portraits of yourself, and you're standing in your studio, and the first one, the background is clear, and the second one is blurred.
Right.
Why the contrast? What's going on here?
Here we're using a very different camera. It's called the Matterport. And the Matterport works where, using the phone as the total control and the storage of the files, you push a button and the camera will turn by itself. So I was moving around as the picture was being taken. So it would do it in steps. And I would move around in that, and that's why there was like double image, half image, and stuff like that. And the sculpture we're talking about was taken with two different images, and I put it on car wrap. So I went to a shop that does car wrap, and they printed out the two files, and then I put it on the metal, and then I bent the metal to form a sculpture so it was self-standing. So, and it's a small piece right now. Technically I could do it maybe to 36 inches high, because I need the ability to fold the piece.
So, John Paul, we've been talking about various photographs, but now we're here in the studio. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about these actual artifacts that are with us.
Yeah.
I'd like to discuss these kind of one at a time from left to right here. Let's take a look. The first one, it looks like there's two people on bicycles, but it's actually the same guy.
Correct.
taken twice.
Right.
And it's kind of concave, rather convex, I should say.
Right.
It's folded out.
Right.
So tell us about that one.
So that one was, I thought it was a very interesting image. And what I did was I actually was able to do a little cutting to get it to be more of it would fan out a little bit or stick out, so from the wall. And I played around a number of ways with paper. I think I printed like 4 or 5 of these on paper, about this size, about maybe 5 inches or 12 inches. And I would play folding around with paper just to get a feel of how I would do it when I finally get it, because I will get it flat. There'll be nothing on the back. I have to put the armature in the back afterwards. And that works very well. And this is one of the things that I get to enjoy, is I look at the pieces and they tell me how they should be presented. They tell me how it should be folded. They're telling me, I don't tell it. Okay. And so I work on based on what I think the piece is telling me to do. And I just simply finish creating the piece in that way. A long time ago, when I showed my earlier photographic pieces that you saw on paper, a curator said to me at a pro arts event, I think these things will work good as sculpture. That was many years ago. And so, but I never knew how I could get it to that level. And that was the thing that took a while to figure out. So that was a piece. So, and it came out very well. I enjoyed this piece a lot.
Yeah, it's convex.
Right.
And then we'll move on to the middle one with the yellow coat.
Right.
I would describe this as folded.
Right, it is. Yeah, and again, even though it's not folded evenly, I wanted the idea of the left side to come out a little bit, because the side that has the person, that would be closer to the wall, is strong enough to actually carry itself off. And again, I will hang it so that it's not the outer edge, but it's the piece. As a matter of fact, this has been cut on one side. I actually jigsaw a piece off of it to help it. If I don't have to cut it, I won't. But sometimes I will cut a little bit off just to give it more interest, give it a dynamic, so the image becomes more dynamic than it is.
And the third one, we see 2 women, and this is kind of concave.
Yeah,
It's
to have it both sides to come out at the viewer.
Yeah.
And that was something I was very interested at. And I'm very careful. The outer image, the very edge of the image, is what was still in the camera. Nothing really has been cut off of this one especially. It's very much what you see is what you get from the camera. And so I'm very cognizant of that. There's no Photoshop manipulation. All of these are put into Photoshop only to prepare the file, so when I send it online to the printer, all the information is there for the printer to be able to produce it.
Well, it's all very interesting, the 3 of them. Mm-hmm. Each one is quite different.
Yeah.
It's a blend of photography and sculpture.
Yeah.
And Jean-Paul, I want to thank you for spending time with us here in East Brunswick Television in our studio. This is really quite remarkable. And maybe you could share with our viewers, tell us a little bit more if they want to find out more about your work.
Well, you can find under JeanPaulPicard.com, that's JEAN-PAUL, you can find my work at JeanPaulPicard.com, Artsy at Jean Paul Picard, and the Hoboken Historical Museum.
All good choices. Well, again, thanks so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us here in East Brunswick.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah.